All right, Democratic candidates, New Hampshire primary, hydraulic fracturing. We're going to be talking about that and more on this episode of the In the Tank podcast. So I am, as always, Donald Kendal, joined by a couple of people here. We have Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. Jim, what up? What up, B?
How's it going? Good to be on the podcast again. I guess I'm a regular. I should stop saying that because now I am part of the podcast, not just a substitute guest.
Jim invited to the next one. Isaac Orr also joining us, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. Now he's a regular.
He sure is, isn't he?
Yeah, I see you say Survivor Pool winner. We'll talk about that. A little jumping the gun a little bit, but we can get to that.
No way.
And then in the dark corner, we have producer extraordinaire Andy Singer.
We'll do it live.
That's true. We're not doing it live, but folks, what should we talk about first? New Hampshire primary was Tuesday. I'm sure everyone already knows the results. Bernie Sanders squeaked out a win. I think about like 1.5% over Buttigieg. But because they're proportionally giving out the delegates, I think he got the same amount of delegates. So
I love it.
Why do you love it?
Because it's the Electoral College that they all want to abolish.
Yeah. Yep. So that, and considering that Buttigieg squeaked out a winner in Iowa, he actually technically has a lead over Bernie Sanders.
That's true.
Isaac is over the moon about this because our Survivor Pool actually got a couple of updates I think during the night of the primary. So Jim, I know you have that. Let's pop that update up here.
Yep.
So as you can see, what Jim, give us the update. A couple of candidates dropped out, right?
Well, yeah. In fact, I was getting home and just taking my coat off and put it up when I heard on the television that Andrew Yang had dropped out before I think there was only about 20% of the votes in New Hampshire, and he had dropped out. And then I don't know, about 45 minutes later, Michael Bennet dropped out. Michael Bennet, I think most people have no idea who he is, let alone that he was running for president. But he's a senator from Colorado. Was trying to go for that middle lane, as they say, and would never had a chance. The fact that he was my last round pick, the 5th round pick for me, I never thought he would have lasted this long for sure. So I felt lucky about that. But Andrew Yang, I mean, again, he also never had a chance. But you know what? He never actually got a chance. It would have been kind of interesting to have a national discussion about the universal basic income, which I think is a terrible idea, but at least it's an idea. There aren't a whole lot of ideas in the Democratic primary right now other than socialism. So that's how it happened.
Well, yeah, Michael Bennet. So I would have been upset because the difference between these candidates announcing dropping out was like literally 6 minutes. So
6 minutes.
Yeah. So we have a descending amount of points that our candidates will get. The idea is to have the lowest score. Right. So I got 9 points for Yang 6 minutes before Jim got 8 points for Michael Bennet. But as you could see, I'm so out of this contest that it doesn't even matter. Usually with these candidates,
would it be fair to say that you are the biggest loser, Donald?
Technically.
Yeah. I think that's a big old yes, isn't it, buddy?
So usually what I do when a candidate drops out is to say, is there any things that you remember fondly about these candidates before they reside to the dustbin of our memories here? Michael Bennet, I'm sure, is a hard no. I literally can't even tell you what the guy looks like. He's right there.
Yeah, I was just mad he stayed in as long as he did.
I know. He gave Jim false hope. Andrew Yang, on the other hand, as Jim was talking about, universal basic income, we've had discussions about that. If he made it further or became a top-tier candidate, surely we would have dedicated more time to that idea, which is an interesting idea. I know, we've kind of harped on it, but there are debates about this in libertarian circles. So there is some people on our side of the aisle that give it some merit, but we'll take that up in the future if that idea ever rises. But any other fond memories of Andrew Yang? I've got a couple.
Oh, just the name Yang Gang is really fun.
That was true. That's true. That was trending on Twitter a few times.
And I'll give Andrew Yang this. He at least stuck around in New Hampshire to thank his supporters and make a formal announcement of dropping. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, the national frontrunner for like the last year, hightailed it out of New Hampshire because he knew he was going to finish very, very poorly. Ended up finishing 5th, I believe, and just hightailed it down to South Carolina, leaving all of his supporters in New Hampshire who did all this work for him on the ground completely in the lurch. Basically it was, thanks suckers. I'm out of here. I mean, that was, you should stick around, at least thank your supporters. That was really, really low class by Biden.
Yeah, there was a couple of things with Yang. There's video of him like failing to use a skateboard, which was pretty funny. That was viral for a little bit. There was this like horrible images of him like putting a whipped cream into his supporters' mouths.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That was not presidential. So,
yeah, but that was cool.
Yeah. So just things that we can, reminisce about fondly about my second round pick, Andrew Yang. So
God, hopefully he's the VP choice.
No chance.
I doubt that very much. So, yep, New Hampshire. I already kind of teased this. Buttigieg won. Any surprise there, Jim? Do you think that this kind of puts him in the upper tier here? Or sorry, did I say Buttigieg won?
Yeah, you did.
He got second place. He got tied basically with delegates, but he's in first place. So is he in the top tier now? Is he someone that we have to consider is going to be the potential candidate?
I suppose it's going to be interesting to see how well he does or doesn't do in more diverse states. To be honest, South Carolina, that's where Biden is supposed to be able to save his campaign because the African American vote will be there for him. The funny thing is that Joe Biden's support among African Americans has cratered since Iowa and New Hampshire, because they see Joe Biden like everybody else sees Joe Biden, a loser, a guy who can't, it's funny. This guy has run for president, our entire lives, basically. He has been running for president at one time or another. He has never won a single primary, not one. Even guys like, Pat Buchanan won a primary against an incumbent president back in 1988. But Joe Biden has never won anything. But it'd be interesting to see how Buttigieg does in like I said, in South Carolina and Nevada, the next two contests, which is a lot more diverse. Pete Buttigieg has not had a lot of money until I think pretty recently. And so he's just been kind of, been getting momentum on groundwork and media appearances. So I don't know if he has the strength to go all the way to the to get the nomination. And I still believe it's probably more likely than not at this point that nobody, thanks to the stupid way these Democrat primaries are run, where everything is proportional, and so nobody can really get a clear win in a state for the most part. I don't think anybody. It's quite possible that nobody will have enough delegates by the time they get to the convention to have claimed the nomination, and that they're going to have to fight it out on the floor, which will be fantastic theater. And Pete Buttigieg might be right up there near the top, and somebody that people are fighting for.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way that they were talking about it really seemed like Biden and Elizabeth Warren was like the top two for a while. And then after these first couple of things, it really now looks like it's Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. And I don't think that, I know you already mentioned how Biden did terribly in New Hampshire, but was it fatal for Elizabeth Warren? I mean, I think might be harsh for you to admit here. Because
she's going down, Jimmy.
she was my first round pick, and it looks like she is going to go down. I mean, if you can't do better than, did she come in fourth in New Hampshire? I believe so.
Fourth, yeah, but
yeah, I mean, it's a neighboring state.
No delegates. She got
right.
Nothing. Yeah,
I mean, it's her neighboring state, and I think she's finished. If she makes it to Super Tuesday, it'll be on fumes on the last bit of her money. And she may even decide to just bail out at that point, bank the money, pay off her campaign staff, and call it a career running for president. So yeah, she's probably the biggest loser of all, other than Biden, from the New Hampshire for sure.
The really surprising part, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but the really surprising part was that Elizabeth Warren was trending upwards on like the national aggregate polls or whatever. And then that thing that we talked about, that sunk her. that debate, right? And where she they basically said, like, Bernie Sanders, you told Elizabeth Warren that she couldn't win because she was a woman. Like, how are you going to respond to that? Or something along those lines. And it was like, we responded like, wow, like they really went after Bernie Sanders there, right? And then what happened in those polls is she tanked and Bernie Sanders went up. So is that just kind of revealing that the media doesn't have as much of a control over the public perception as maybe they once used to?
I don't know. I think it's important for us to look at this Democratic primary run the way and think about the way the Republican primary in 2016 worked out. Yes. I mean, nobody would have said that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee, even at this point in the race. And you might remember, it seemed like every contender had their moment, and then they went into the toilet. Jeb Bush. Jeb, exclamation point, and all of his signs. He was supposed to be the nominee. He was the front runner. He had all the establishment Republicans behind him. He had all the money in the world. That was going to be the guy. And he completely flamed out. He had no real support going on out there. You remember, there was a moment for Marco Rubio out there. And I believe he put out an ad that tried to kind of match Trump in dig for dig. And it was a complete failure. And it was actually at that moment that he went right into the toilet. And so one after another, these Republican candidates tried to come at Trump, and it was the coming at Trump that ended up sinking their campaigns. And I think you're seeing the same kind of dynamic here. Warren went after Bernie Sanders, and then she started going right down in the polls because you know what? The support for Bernie is similar to the support, I think, for Donald Trump in 2016, and that the people that are behind him are really passionately behind him. And then that's a great base to work from, and then you start to build momentum, and then you bring on these more passive people who want to back a winner and not a loser. I mean, that's just the way politics works, and I think this is why I still believe that Bernie is ultimately going to get the nomination, because his people are more passionate and care about this a lot more than Elizabeth Warren's people do. And when she tried to go after him on sexism, that just completely flopped. Mm-hmm. And it put her down. And what's going to be interesting is now Buttigieg, I think, he's close enough now to Bernie. So now what does he do? Is he going to go after Bernie and try to attack him, try to stab him really politically? And if he does, what happens then? And I think he'll probably suffer the same fate as Elizabeth Warren did.
Yeah, well, I'm curious because I didn't really perceive it as Elizabeth Warren going after Bernie Sanders. I thought of it more as the media going after.
Oh, no, I totally saw it as Warren going after Bernie Sanders. Okay. Like, you don't release a statement like that unless you are making a concerted effort. I think what happened is, we talked about how one of them needs to drop out in order for the progressive candidate to have a chance.
Yeah.
I think that was her trying to wrest away some of those progressives from Bernie. And nobody believed her because she has been dishonest about a lot of different things. So
I don't know what you're talking about.
But I think that's what happened. And to me, that's what happened. And now I also think that the Klobuchar surge, by the way, I'm winning the survivor pool because of Amy Klobuchar. So yeah. I'd like to see how your hair would fare in a blizzard. So I think that a lot of the people who tended to be more, I think there was two constituencies that were bolstering Warren's numbers. One, progressives that weren't for Bernie, and two, people that wanted to see a woman nominee. They are fleeing from Elizabeth Warren just to sink Jim Lakely's chances.
That's it.
They've been listening to In the Tank. I'm their favorite, just like Michaela Kendal. I am her favorite person on this podcast, even more than Donald, her husband. So, yeah, thank you, everyone, for your support of Amy Klobuchar.
That's right. Yeah, we do know that In the Tank, it's been scientifically proven, 97% of scientists agree that In the Tank has a direct impact on national politics. So that has been proven. The consensus is in. So to talk about these candidates with a little more substance than just the political angle, I have found a couple of items here that just kind of reveals their stances on a couple of important topics. So I've got here from the Tax Foundation. This is a piece that's tracking the 2020 presidential tax plans. And everything we talk about, you can find in the show notes. But this just kind of goes through. I've only got the main people here. I kind of cut out some of them. But Joe Biden, and it talks about where they stand on tax rates on ordinary income. So Joe Biden, Michael Bloomberg here, because he's the wild card. Pete
Mini Mike.
Mini Mike, yep, Bernie Sanders, and I got Elizabeth Warren over here. So on all accounts, they pretty much all agree that they want to end or reverse the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act's tax cuts on the wealthy and return that back up to the 39.6%. Bernie Sanders wants to implement a 4% income-based premium tax on households earning more than $29,000. It's not really on the rich, $29,000. And Michael Bloomberg wants to increase taxes on the wealthy, et cetera, et cetera. But the more interesting, and it goes through some of the tax credits and payroll taxes, estate taxes. So if you want to get insight into where they stand on these issues, check out the document in full. But the one that I wanted to focus a little bit more of attention on is the corporate tax rate. So in addition to lowering tax rates across the board, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act also reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21%. So the candidates pretty much all want to re-raise it. However, they don't want to raise it all the way back up to 35, most of them at least. So Joe Biden here wants to raise it back up to 28%. There's a little bit of caveats in that as well. Michael Bloomberg wants to raise it up to 28%. Buttigieg wants to raise it all the way back up to 35%. Bernie Sanders, 35% as well. Elizabeth Warren also wants to get it up to 35%. And she wants to create a 7% surtax on corporate profits, as reported on financial statements. So beyond 35%.
Right. I'm surprised Bernie isn't there too.
You know what? I'm sure that there's some stuff in there. There's some details where he does want to increase it. But, 35%, we have it down to 21. So I was looking through what is the corporate tax rates just in the world. So I found a website that kind of sorted it out. The highest corporate tax rate in the world is Puerto Rico at 37.5%. Okay, so these candidates that want to raise it to 35 and even higher, that puts us in the league of the people that have it the highest. So 35% is also a rate that's shared by countries such as Chad, Congo, Malta, Sudan, Zambia. So they want us to put it in that category.
I mean, how many corporations, how many companies are incorporated in those countries? For crying
these are
out loud?
economic powerhouses, Donald.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get most of my products from the Congo. Brazil's at 34% and Venezuela at 34%. So then the thing is that I thought about is like, well, these candidates, they always, or at least Bernie Sanders, is always saying that we want to resemble Sweden or Denmark. So anyone have an idea of where their corporate tax rates are? Got the numbers right here.
21%.
Yeah, I put the over under at 22.
Okay, you guys are pretty much dead on. Denmark, 22%. Norway, 24%. Yep. Sweden, 22%. So also, Tax Foundation has done studies on this. And they show that the Europe's regional average is 18.35%. So their regional average is lower than what we currently have under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And when you weigh it by their GDP, it's actually around 25%, but still right around that category. The highest regional is South Africa. That averages 28%. So these candidates want to have a higher corporate tax rate than South America. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll open it up to you guys for your comments or whatever, is I found a few charts also from the Tax Foundation. The first one shows the trends. So over time, you've seen a trend towards countries taking on a smaller burden or putting a smaller burden on their countries here. So so that bottom line there is the worldwide average. So you could see how back in the 80s there, it was north around 40%, and it's been trending downwards. So it's just basically a sign of the times. The other chart that I have here is from 2017, and it shows just basically a graph showing where the candidates are, how many countries are in each tax bracket, basically. So pull that one up. So boom, you see here, most of the countries are at that 20 to 25% range. 35, where we were, is only a rate that we see in just a handful of these countries. Now, this isn't all countries. This is a specific set of them. But, I mean, look at this, man. So I don't know what's the disconnect here. Why do these candidates want to put such a high burden on corporations in America? I'll go to Jim.
Oh, well, because they think it's good for the politics of greed and envy. People, Bernie, I think maybe one of the unstated parts of his plan is that he'd probably like to put a lot of corporate, CEOs in jail for various crimes against the people and all that stuff. It's really quite scary, so the way he attacks corporations. But it's because they think they obviously think that we're not taxed enough. I mean, it's just indoctrinated into the democratic brain that corporations need to pay their fair share. That's completely nonsense, because corporations don't pay taxes. People pay taxes. Those costs are passed down to you and me. I think what's interesting is you see all of these European countries with lower corporate tax rates, which is nice, which is good, but all of those countries actually you're much more taxed in countries like France or Italy, or in Sweden and Norway and Scandinavia, because they all have VAT taxes, and so there's this added tax on everything everybody buys, and so really the burden on the individual person in Europe is a lot harder than it is on an average American as far as paying taxes is concerned. And I suppose they want to keep their corporate tax rates relatively low so that all of these corporations don't just flee to Singapore or somewhere else instead. But it was the lowering of the corporate tax rate to get the United States on a more even keel, or in better competition with other destinations for corporations, for companies to incorporate. That has really been the probably most important reform by Donald Trump to kick off this economic boom we are experiencing right now. I mean, literally, companies have decided to bring things back from China. They've decided to invest in their own companies here in the United States, and it's really all due to the lowering of the corporate tax rate, not to as low as it maybe could have been. We could get, maybe it should be 15% or 16% instead of what is it now, 21%. So yeah. The 35% corporate tax rate was very, very punitive, and it really held back the great American economic engine that was just wanting to get unleashed, and Donald Trump did that.
Isaac, we want to jump in. Any comments on that idea, the corporate tax rate? You want to move on to another thing I got here that's a little more in your wheelhouse?
No, I like this. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about it is when you look at the lowest tax rates for individual taxpayers in places like Norway and Sweden, it's higher than their corporate tax rate.
Yeah.
So if they're talking about, and especially because it's like, oh, these corporations need to pay their fair share, like the countries that they want to emulate the most are the ones who have tax rates for corporations that are below even the lowest tax rates for individuals. So it's totally the opposite of what they claim is going to happen, or what is happening over there. So they live in a fantasy land, and it could be Jim's reason, right? I mean, that's very possible. But I think people just want to believe that these other countries actually tax their corporations more than their individuals, when clearly the data show they don't.
Yeah, and I mean, we can get into this a lot. We tend to get into this a lot, but yeah, the taxing structure in these Scandinavian countries, they have a lot flatter of a rate across their brackets or whatever. Everyone is paying high income tax rates. So Bernie Sanders, you got to think about this when you talk about how we want to emulate these countries. You actually have to look into it a little bit. Some interesting facts there.
It just comes down to the mindset of guys like Bernie Sanders and people like Elizabeth Warren and the others, and really every Democrat running for president. Is their mindset is that your money doesn't belong to you. The government has first claim on all of your labor, all of your investments, all the risk that you take. And that applies to corporations as well. The government really should be taking all of that and redistributing it to people who deserve it more than you do. I think that's pretty much the mindset in a lot of those socialist countries in Europe as well. But that's a very un-American idea. I don't think it will fly. I actually really do look forward to Bernie Sanders winning the Democratic nomination and having a real discussion about what causes economic growth, what encourages economic growth, and what causes economic stagnation and misery, really, for people. And that's taking away their money and their labor when the government doesn't really have that much claim on it, or shouldn't, in a free country.
Yeah. I also have a piece here. This was from the Washington Post, and this was, I think we're going to do a little bit more of this, of just kind of showing maybe every week or so, just kind of getting into a topic and seeing where the candidates stand on it. Basically, just the ones that matter. I think we'll wean some of these out.
Whoa, you mean not like Andrew Yang or any of the other candidates that you selected, Donald?
So I got here a piece from the Washington Post.
Eat it.
It's where Democrats stand, and the question is, would you ban fracking? Which I just love that that's like their title for this. It's not, your position on fracking. It's just, would you ban it? So I've got a couple here. Let's see. So under the yes category, and even the way that they kind of like mix these up is interesting, but we can get into that. So under the yes category, we have Tulsi Gabbard, who says, yes, I support a ban on all hydraulic fracturing operations. So
wow.
Andy, another platform that she is just absolutely terrible on. Bernie Sanders, yes, fracking is a danger to the water supply. It's a danger to the air we breathe. It has resulted in more earthquakes. It's highly explosive. And to top it off, methane and natural gas is contributing to climate change. The idea of safe fracking, it's like clean coal, is pure fiction. And then basically...
I love it when Bernie people tell me something's unrealistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, sorry to interrupt.
No. And we'll get to Bernie Sanders. Tom Steyer basically says, yes, we should, but it can't happen instantly. So then a little caveat there.
Did you drop out?
No, there was fake news that Jim was helping spread. Tom Steyer is still running.
Okay.
So then Elizabeth Warren also supports a ban on all fracking. That was according to her campaign. So then in the category of limit it or regulate it better, so it's basically yes or limit it or regulate it better. Michael Bennett, well, no, who cares? He's out. Joe Biden basically opposes new drilling on public lands. He seemed to have the most nuanced approach to this, response to this. He basically says that he needs to look into cases and basically make a judgment on whether those are dangerous or not or whatever, and help fix any damage that has already been done. Michael Bloomberg says that we need a rapid phase out of all fossil fuels. So I don't know why that's in this category and not the other. Pete Buttigieg says, I favor a ban on new fracking and a rapid end to existing fracking so that it can build 100% clean energy society as soon as possible. So again, it's like that's a very similar to what Tom Steyer had to say, but Buttigieg is in the limit it or regulate it better section. I don't know. And Amy Klobuchar with the Klobumentum, she says that she would support regulations on fracking. I see natural gas as a transitional fuel. It's better than oil, but it's not nearly as good as wind and solar. So as a president, in my first 100 days, I will review every fracking permit there is and decide which ones should be allowed to continue and which ones are too dangerous. So a lot on her plate. But Isaac, I mean, it seems like it's pretty unanimous across the board. They all want to take out fracking. Think that's a winning strategy, Cotton?
I love it. It's great. It's a winning strategy for not them.
Yeah, for Donald Trump. I mean,
or anyone else, but yes, not them.
So I think the person that kind of hit the most headlines with this topic would be Bernie Sanders.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he had a plan that he wants to ban it all, right? Nationwide ban on fracking, right? Am I misinterpreting his statement there?
No, I mean, it was literally legislation that he co-sponsored with freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that would ban fracking.
Yes, right, exactly. So you're the fracking guy, sir. And, I know your thing says Survivor Pool winner, but that's not true. But you are the fracking guy. You can follow on Twitter, folks. So just coincidentally, when we were coming up with topics to talk about this week, I had a group chat going on with my brother and a couple of friends. And one of them shared an article saying that the United States led the entire world in reducing CO2 emissions in 2019, to which I responded, thanks to fracking and natural gas, both things that the left hates. And then one of my friends says, well, I'm unsure about fracking too. So then I had to explain to him, and basically I had to look up your stuff to explain to him because you're the fracking guy. But I had this conversation as we were picking this topic to talk about. So I thought, what a better place to get into it all than on this podcast with the fracking guy himself. So
sure. Yeah, let me talk some sense into that friend of yours.
Yeah. So
behind the woodshed, metaphorically speaking.
I mean, I don't know how, how into the basics we need to get. I don't know if we want to do an elevator pitch of just fracking in general before we get to some of the common concerns. But yeah, just hit us up, man. What's fracking?
Sure. It is a process where we're getting more oil and natural gas out of the ground than we were previously able to, because we're able to access oil and gas in a different geologic formation. So basically, it is allowing us to do things that we weren't able to do before, and it's been really good for our oil and gas production. The United States went from being a big importer of oil, and we were actually building infrastructure to import natural gas. Now we're the largest producer of natural gas in the world, largest producer of oil in the world, and that would not have happened without it.
Right. So then I was correct to say that we can attribute the reductions in CO2 emissions in the United States to this newfound glut of natural gas, right?
Yeah, that's part of it for sure. So the history of natural gas has been, there's a lot of price volatility. It was very expensive in 2007, 2008. So it didn't make sense to burn it for electricity generation. So instead of that, we just burn coal. So the way that things have changed, Pennsylvania went from producing very little natural gas to being the second largest natural gas producing state in the country because of hydraulic fracturing, which is the real term for fracking, in the Marcellus Shale. So gas became so cheap there, natural gas became so cheap there, that it actually kind of had a negative price. You had to pay people to get rid of it in some cases. So we built a bunch of natural gas power plants there, and that has supplanted some of the coal generation in areas where there's abundant gas.
Right. And that's obviously got less CO2 emissions when you burn natural gas than that counterparts.
Correct.
Okay, great. So the first response from the friend after I said some of these basic things was, well, how about the fact that it makes the groundwater flammable? So now this is obviously a reference to that, was it Fracking Nation?
Gasland.
Gas.
Oh, it is Gasland. I thought it was Gas Bag, but no, Jim, you're right.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a movie created by a guy named Josh Fox, I believe his name was. I think it was in 2009. It was early during the fracking phenomenon. So hydraulic fracturing has been around since the 1940s in some capacity, but really what changed the game when it came to this technology is the ability to drill horizontally. Or so basically you'll drill down and then you'll make, I'm trying to do this backwards, so it's not working on the screen as well. And then you drill down and then you're able to turn the well laterally and do this throughout a long lateral is what they call it. So they can actually drill wells that are a mile or two long. And they fracture the rocks on the bottom of this formation, and that's where the oil and gas comes out. And this combination of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing really kind of hit its stride in the late 1990s in Texas, and then in the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006 in Pennsylvania. So Josh Fox comes out with this mockumentary as factually accurate as This Is Spinal Tap. And
Sorry, go ahead.
They went to this guy in Colorado and they said, hey, he says, well, I can light my fire or my tap water on fire. And what they don't tell you is this guy had actually drilled his well. His water well was drilled through a coal bed, which is a natural source of methane. So even if fracking had never been invented at all, his water would have been flammable. So it was really a lot of bait and switch there. And what happens when they drill this well, they have multiple layers of cement and steel as a well casing to protect groundwater resources. So a new study just released the other day, a few days ago, from the federal government said that hydraulic fracturing was not impacting groundwater or surface water in Pennsylvania, which is, like I said before, one of the largest producers of natural gas. So the flammable water is false.
All right, put an X on the board for that one.
That's right.
So how
Strike
about
one in Family Feud? Mark it, Steve Harvey.
So the other thing is that was brought up after I kind of dispelled that one with the help of your resources. Was that well? Isn't it dangerous to put chemicals in to use underground? Couldn't that seep into the groundwater? So I know that they use a fluid to fracture, right? I mean, what is that? And is it possible that can contaminate wells, though, groundwater?
Yeah. So it's not likely. And when I say that, it's basically geologically impossible for this stuff to seep upward. So when you're talking about these wells that they're drilling, they're generally thousands of feet below the surface. And just the time scale that it would take something that is like the water, I guess, the fluid, to migrate upwards is like hundreds of millions of years. So basically, there's no way that happens. The only way that you could have contamination of the well water or the groundwater from fracking is if those cement casings and steel casings that they use in order to protect groundwater have some sort of error. So It's not that never happens. There are well casings that fail. It's a thing. But it is very rare. And the industry is generally, they don't want that because then they're charged with cleaning it up.
Right. And I would assume that's the type of stuff that would happen with any type of resource mining, whether it's offshore drilling and the different things that we've seen with that, or just anything along those lines. Yeah,
generally where you see the most contamination from oil and gas production is surface spills. So if some of the brine that comes out, so they use different chemicals for different purposes in hydraulic fracturing fluid. They use some things to kill bacteria. So there's like antibiotic properties. There's rust inhibitors. There's things that like ethylene glycol that make the stuff, it's like antifreeze texture. Okay. And it makes the sand that they pump in there. They also pump sand into these wells in order to keep the fractures open. So just kind of back up a little bit. The reason that we do fracking is because the amount of oil that we were able to get out of traditional rock formations has been decreasing over time. So when we first started pumping for oil, we basically were exploiting sandstone formations that had a lot of oil in it. So if you think of like a sandstone formation, it's very porous and it's very permeable, which means that the oil and gas can flow pretty easily through it. It's basically like sticking a straw into a drink that you get from McDonald's. So the drink is the oil or gas, and the ice is like the fluid or the particles in the sandstone. But with fracking, we're actually getting oil and gas out of shale, which is more like bubble wrap. There's lots of oil and natural gas in these little pockets, but the pockets aren't interconnected, so they can't flow very easily. So what fracking is doing is it is popping bubble wrap and allowing us to get the good stuff, which is, oil and gas out of the ground.
So if there is some crack in the casing and there is some groundwater contamination, like obviously we would be for some type of restitution or some cleanup, or, I mean, obviously.
Oh, absolutely.
You guys are screwed.
If you break it, you buy it, right? Yeah. That's what property rights advocates are all about. So, this isn't a carte blanche license to pollute, as it's always, characterized by people who don't like fracking. They actually have done a lot of research, and it's very cool. They're able to do they're able to test water for a chemical signature to determine whether the methane or whatever is in a well comes from fracking or comes from a different layer of geology. And they do that by looking at the noble gas signature, because noble gases aren't reactive. So if you have a certain isotope of a noble gas in one layer, but not in another, you can just use that to distinguish, okay, where is this contamination coming from?
Yeah. Don't get too far in the weeds, Sarah. You're losing me a little bit.
Look at the big brain on Isaac. Hey.
So Bernie Sanders' statement in this thing that I read referenced earthquakes. So this is the idea that you're pumping this fluids in there. It gets towards a fault line that's going to loosen that up. It's going to lube it up, and we're going to actually get an earthquake. Now, I remember hearing stories about that like a lot, like a few years ago. Not so much lately. What's the truth in that section?
Oh, that can happen. So basically what happens is it isn't so much the fracking itself that's causing earthquakes. It's the disposal of the wastewater that comes after that. So when they're doing the hydraulic fracturing process, they use anywhere between like 2 million and 5 million gallons of water to pump the sand and the chemical additives into this shale layer that I was talking about earlier. And basically, they just pump that water into the well at such a pressure that it causes the rocks to crack. And some of this water flows back up to the surface, and it's got things like, not great stuff in it. You got naturally occurring radioactive material, so you have to dispose of it in a way that is environmentally responsible. So in Oklahoma, which is where you saw the majority of earthquakes that were due to disposal of wastewater, they were pumping it into this old formation that they'd been using to dispose of oil and gas wastewater for a really long time. But when oil prices were really high, like, I don't know, it was like $105 per barrel for a while there. They were basically getting oil from this formation that was 90% wastewater, so like brine, and 10% oil. So it was basically a saltwater well that had a little oil and gas associated with it. So the amount of wastewater that they had to pump into this disposal well, or this disposal formation, was so much more than they'd ever done before that it was causing a lot of earthquakes in Oklahoma.
Okay. So if the Washington Post, if you were a candidate for the Democrats and the Washington Post came to you with this question, would you ban fracking? I would assume you'd say no. But is there any other kind of policy prescriptions that you would put on this to kind of reassure people that are concerned about this ideas of flammable water and poisoning of groundwater and earthquakes?
Well, they were able, I would say this, I should have talked about this when we were talking about earthquakes. They were able to basically eliminate the earthquakes caused by this disposal in Oklahoma by reducing the amount of water that they put into this formation and making people monitor this stuff more closely. So the environmental challenges that have arisen as a result of fracking are manageable. And that's really important because everything happens in a real world cost benefit analysis, not in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to talk about all the money people have saved on natural gas and oil over the last, really 7 years of the American fracking revolution.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I got a piece right here. This is something that you sent my way. This is from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and it's an article called U.S. Energy Dominance, the Case for Unbridled Optimism. So what this gets into, it says, one thing was clear from President Trump's State of the Union address last week. There's no stopping America's energy dominance. The case for unbridled optimism, in the president's words, was clear last week's hopeful and forward-looking remarks. Thanks to our bold regulatory reduction campaign, the United States has become the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world by far, President Trump declared. Our nation has risen quickly from energy dependence to global dominance, and there's no end to this unprecedented growth in sight. So stopping right there, Jim, I mean, you have been in the political sphere longer than any of us. This idea, this like platform of becoming energy independent. I remember hearing that from when I was a little kid. And now you look at these charts and it shows that we are actually energy independent.
Yeah.
Was that like when that was talked about, was that ever like a real goal? And like, and then how about the fact that we are that now? Like, what's your reactions to those?
I think it's wonderful that we're energy independent now. And, I grew up, I was born in 1970. So I have vague memories as a child of the energy crisis of the late 70s during the presidency of Jimmy Carter. And it was, and all through the 80s, it was basically, conventional wisdom that the United States will always be dependent on the Middle East, a very unstable and dangerous Middle East, to keep fueling our economy, that, to put the gasoline in the cars and to, and all of that, oil from the Middle East was absolutely necessary. It was a necessary evil to have to deal with these countries, and we would never be able to be energy independent. The oil boom, the show Dallas was on in the 80s, and it was kind of like at the end of the Texas oil boom, really, all these millionaires that were made out in the patches of West Texas. Those things, we never thought we would have gotten to this place. And it really is the miracle of fracking, and the horizontal drilling combined, really American innovation. Nobody was really doing this and exploiting exploiting the resources that we could get out of there on a scale that the United States did. And what I think is remarkable is how quickly this has all happened. I was my first job. I'm not really in politics. I really haven't been in politics, but I've been a journalist covering politics before I came to Heartland for a long time. And I got my start in rural Pennsylvania, north Pennsylvania, near the New York border, in a town called Bradford. And there were derricks. Quaker State Oil, for instance, was founded, and on all the oil that you would get out of northern Pennsylvania, the quality of it was so high. It was so good. It was too good to ever refine and put into your car. What a waste that would be. But it made a fantastic lubricant. Some of the best oil lubricant in the world came out of Pennsylvania. And so even when I went up there for my first job in the mid 1990s, you would still see people had old oil derricks in their backyards or in their front yards, still getting oil out of the ground. And I found that amazing because you thought that kind of stuff was over. But northern Pennsylvania and rural Pennsylvania was dotted with towns that were dying or already dead because industry had left these places. But it started to come back because the Marcellus Shale that Isaac had referred to is there in Pennsylvania, northern Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania and New York. And that's where the fracking the fracking boom really began. And it spread out to other formations across the country, North Dakota, for instance, and other places. But these towns in Pennsylvania came back. And when Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and all of the others say we're going to ban fracking. In fact, this is why I really want Bernie to be the nominee for the Democratic Party, because I want to have real discussions about this, and I want people to understand the choices here, not just on taxes, but especially on energy. Because day one, Bernie Sanders will sign an executive order banning fracking on all land in the United States. Now, there should be and would be legal challenges to that. But what that means is an economic death sentence for all of these towns in Western Pennsylvania that are coming back, and all the jobs that flow downstream from the jobs from fracking. And so so essentially Bernie Sanders could kiss Pennsylvania goodbye. He could probably kiss Ohio goodbye, because Southeast Ohio is big on fracking as well. And they can't win without Pennsylvania and Ohio. So it is just so tone deaf that these Democrats, they believe things that aren't true about fracking. They perpetuate these myths that Isaac Orr did such a fantastic job debunking here on this podcast. And I think we should have a choice and a real discussion and a debate about these things, and so that people understand there is one way you can go down a socialist road that believes things that aren't true about fracking and energy production in this country, or you can go down the prosperity road where you do have an industry, energy industry alive in this country, and you have really for the first time something that was thought to be a myth, something that was thought to never be able to happen, and that is to make the United States energy independent. And in fact, we are exporting natural gas around the world when we weren't even exporting any natural gas because we didn't have enough of it really to export, and plus there were restrictions on that as well. But that's something that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. And here we are exporting natural gas around the world. And, hey, if you don't like Russia, if you're a big enemy of Russia and you think that, we need to do everything we can to counter them, exporting natural gas to Europe is a great way to go about it. And I think our first customer should be Poland. And then you work your way through the Eastern Europe from there.
It's just crazy to me because, again, just growing up, and I would hear we got to become energy independent. And it was just
always an argument for BS renewables.
Right. And it's just that was just one of the things you would hear time and time again. And it's just it became a reality. And I feel like we just don't give it enough attention. Or at least we probably do, but it's generally not given enough attention. This article goes on to kind of say some of those things that you were talking about, how this makes us less reliant on the Middle East and Russia for critical energy needs. It also talks about how this energy kind of glut that we have has stabilized oil prices, which is a good thing for anyone that drives a car. And then it's also basically allowed us to fear less about potential resource wars. That's, it's been a thing that people have talked about for a while. And that it's also led to economic prosperity. There's a lot of health benefits that go along with this, and environmental benefits that I know Isaac has talked about in the past. So Isaac, can too much be said about this idea of energy independence and energy abundance? It seems like it's just a tide that's rising all ships.
It certainly is, Donald. There was a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research. They're kind of like considered the gold standard, or at least that's what our British economist tells me, that lower energy prices, thanks to fracking, have saved almost $2,500 for a family of four annually since it came into the picture. So that's lower heating bills if you're in Minnesota or anywhere else that you have a lot of natural gas for home heating. That's huge. I mean, just like the opportunities that this is affording people to do other things with their money besides spend it on not freezing to death is not talked about in a way. And we have kooks in Minnesota that want to ban natural gas for home heating, even though it's 8 times more expensive to heat your home with electricity.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, really, the profound impact of this cannot be overstated, but people take it for granted because they're like, oh, well, gas prices should be lower, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where I feel like there's an inverse relationship between people's appreciation for energy when, they appreciate affordable energy when the cost is high, but when the cost is low, they take it for granted. So I think that it's really cool that we're talking about this and letting people know that, hey, the reason that the price is lower at the pump, I mean, I remember in 2013, we were paying like $3.50 a gallon. And, the other day I looked at it, it was $2.29. So that is all because of American oil production.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, again, when we talk about how like, they only want to look at the one side of the ledger type of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like all of the benefits that come out of this, just the myriad of benefits that we were just talking about. And it's like, let's get rid of all of that to prevent some little micro earthquake in Oklahoma, potentially.
We must destroy the human quality of life to preserve the human quality of life.
Yeah. I mean, Isaac, this, that energy, fossil fuels basically is called the master resource. And it's because energy, I mean, it's a very basic thing, but and people, like you said, Isaac, take it for granted that energy drives everything else, that the price of everything you pay for is related to how expensive it is to produce, and how expensive it is to produce and ship is all dependent on how expensive energy is. And so when you increase or you do, as the Democrats would like to do, artificially and arbitrarily make natural gas and oil more scarce because we won't have as much here in our country, and we'd have to import it from others, so it would be more expensive. The whole quality of your life goes down, and the cost of living for you and everything you do goes up. I mean, without cheap energy is absolutely the key to every bit of our economic growth. And that's why it's so important in the developing nations as well. That's why that's why, frankly, China and India and Brazil are telling the United Nations, to hell with your Paris Climate Accord. We're not going to do that. We have millions, tens, hundreds of millions of people in poverty that we would like to raise up to your level of standard of living. And we're going to do that through fossil fuels because it's cheap, reliable, and we have it. And, that is the key to everything. Energy prices drives all of the economic growth or shrinking all around the world.
Yeah, Japan's building more coal plants too, which is awesome.
Oh yes, I saw that. Yeah, because they don't want to go near nuclear. They have to figure out something to power their country with. So yeah, going to coal. That's another. Gosh, yeah. So
full stop into the coal.
Right. No, and the key thing is that they have to. They have to do it. All these things like, we can transition to wind, and so you can't. Japan is not, they may have abandoned nuclear and whatever, that's a decision they make, but they realize that their entire society will collapse if they try to power it on solar and wind and other kinds of, really fantasy energy sources. It can't be done. And so, they're not going to commit economic and societal suicide. They're going to build coal plants. Sorry, that's the way the world works.
Say it again, Isaac.
Seppuku.
That's right. So I had one more topic, but I think dedicating the meat of this podcast to fracking was the right way to go. So I'm going to discard this. Maybe we'll get to it next time.
What was it, Donnie?
Have a couple of minutes left. So I do want to ask, what are you guys watching? So I've been in a rut when it comes to TV and movies or whatever. I've basically been watching like Seinfeld again for like the 45th time.
Love it.
So is there anything that you guys
making me thirsty?
These pretzels are making me thirsty. Yes, that's absolutely right.
These pretzels are making me thirsty.
So obviously Isaac will tell me just to keep watching that. But I don't know, you guys, is there anything worth watching? Anything I should get on top of here?
Oh yeah, my girlfriend and I are watching Gold Rush from Discovery Channel. It's basically these guys up in the Canadian Klondike digging for gold, and it's pretty great. Every episode is basically like, well, we got to go get that dirt, move it over there, wash it off, get the gold out. And then like every like commercial break is like, oh no, the machine broke down. So it's like very formulaic, but it's very fun at the same time.
Okay, I will not write that one down. Jim,
screw you.
Jim, anything you can suggest?
Actually, a couple things. My wife and I started watching 30 Rock again. I think it was on Hulu for a long time, and I hadn't seen it in several years. I think I used to DVR it and like on some very obscure network. It was on. I think it was even on standard definition, and so but those had run out, and then I just couldn't find it anymore. I just couldn't find 30 Rock, and then suddenly I discovered the other day that it was on Amazon, and so when I started watching it, my wife and I started watching it again from the beginning. And, the pilot of 30, that show is just brilliant. It's so funny. But what was interesting to me was, because I've seen the show a couple times all the way through, the pilot was perfect. That pilot might have been the funnious sitcom pilot of all time.
I need facial reactions to Jim's nonsense here. Not funny. That show is not good. I don't like
that show. That show is hilarious.
I watched multiple seasons of it. I discard your suggestion. I don't like it. Big Office fan. Big Parks and Rec, could not get into 30 Rock. Sorry.
No, I mean, look, The Office is great, but The Office is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So I'm watching. You asked me what I'm watching. Just be quiet and let me tell you why it's good. The pilot is really
Donald. You shut up.
Be quiet. You'll get your chance. But what's actually remarkable at that pilot is that the character of Jack Donaghy, played by Alec Baldwin, is fully realized, and his character is fully developed in that very first episode. You learn everything you need to know about him. He doesn't, need to change or evolve or kind of hit his stride. He is on stride right from the first episode. So I'm really enjoying that.
Nobody cares about Alec Baldwin. He is so like a decade ago. Give me something new, folks. I don't want to watch.
Mr. I'm watching Seinfeld says Alec Baldwin was a decade ago. Sure.
To watch. You're telling me something that was ended like a decade ago. Give me something.
You asked me what I'm watching. I'll tell you. The second
Mandalorian.
I already watched that. I watched that like
watch it again.
The second program I'm watching now is I'm rewatching from the beginning The Expanse, which it was on the Sci-Fi Channel. It's very good. It's got a little bit of Firefly in it, which I was a big Firefly fan. For its one season, so it's got a little bit of a feel for that. It's set in I think 200 years or 300 years in the future, where humans have colonized Mars and also the asteroid belt. And they're at war with each other. I think it's very smartly written. It's based on the book series, The Expanse. So there's a lot of great source material. And so I'm confident it'll continue to be good, because unlike Game of Thrones, they're not going to run out of material and try to make it up as they go along. And so I highly recommend The Expanse. I think it's a good show. It's been picked up by Amazon. They got at least 5 seasons to go. Season 4 just came out a few months ago. So it's a good show to get into.
See, now that is one I can get behind. That is one that I've considered for a while. So with the Jim Lakely seal of approval, maybe I'll give that one a shot. Yes, Andy, thank you. What should Donnie watch? Should be Donald. Email inthetankpodcast@gmail.com.
So I will say this. Our economist, John Phelan, has been watching episodes of The Apprentice. And he said, if you watch them now, knowing that Trump is president, it is just hilarious.
Oh, that is interesting.
He's like, I'm rich. I'm really rich. Look at all of my buildings.
That's right. Yeah. So, all right. Well, that should do it. That'll do it for today. Audience, thank you for tuning in. Tune in every Friday for a new episode of In the Tank podcast. Please write a review for us on iTunes. We would greatly appreciate it. You can also find us on Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube. For those people that are just listening, you can check us out. See, put a face to the voice. Check us out on YouTube. Pretty much everything nowadays. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. Any comments, suggestions, questions to the show, email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Isaac, where can the fine people find you?
On Twitter at the Fracking Guy and at AmericanExperiment.org.
Man, you really lived up to the name in this episode. That's finally.
Huzzah!
That's great. Jim Lakely, where can the people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst for the Heartland Institute, and also visit heartland.org.
All right, and a special thanks to producer extraordinaire over there in the dark corner. Folks, thanks again for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.